The void between stars has always been a place of silence, but silence in the Imperium is never peace. It is the pause before a scream, the hush before the chain blade rises, the breath drawn by a world that knows its last hour approaches. For millennia, rogue traders have sailed these gulfs with parchments of authority bearing the Imperial Aquila, sanctioned by the High Lords of Terra themselves. Their task is to claim, to explore, to barter, and when need demands, to plunder. Yet behind the gold leaf of their warrants and the oaths they recite before ecclesiarchal altars, there lingers another truth, whispered in the archives of the Ordo Hereticus and prayed about in the shadowed chapels of voidfarers. Rogue traders do not merely bring worlds into the Emperor's light, they bleed them dry. Before we descend into that darkness, a brief word. The archives of forbidden knowledge grow only when shared. If you find resonance, heareth this tale of greed, decay, and ambition sharpened into a knife feels worthy of remembrance, then lend your strength to it. Subscribe, share, and let these chronicles echo further across the datasphere, that more might know what the Imperium dares not say aloud. This is the tale of how rogue traders exploit planets for dark gains in Warhammer 40,000. The veil always falls, softly, when a rogue trader vessel breaks from the void. There are no bombardments, no clarion horns of conquest, no thunder of orbital batteries. Instead, there is awe. Whole continents stop their labor to watch the heavens as a silhouette blooms against the firmament. Larger than the mountains, a cathedral of steel, gliding upon silent engines. The warrant bearer within carries more than authority. They embody myth, a living extension of the Emperor's will, or so they declare. Vox grills resound with proclamations of fortune and advancement. The kind of words that frontier governors record on data slates to repeat for generations. For the isolated and the desperate, there can be no sweeter song. In a galaxy where survival is counted day to day in Prometheum rations and the mercy of weather systems, the promise of abundance feels divine, and yet, promises are rarely delivered in the manner expected. The Warrant of Trade is not a simple charter. It is a relic, each line etched with blood and decree, binding the dynasty not only to the Imperium, but to the shadowed corridors of power that keep its endless engines running. It is a license to defy, and to profit in equal measure, a shield against censure, and a dagger to be driven wherever opportunity arises. Planets that fall under the gaze of such a figure are not merely discovered. They are appraised, weighed, and measured like gems to be cut, their brilliance sharpened into profit. A governor may call it salvation, but in truth, it is valuation, the worth of soil, of bodies, of faith. All tallied long before the first handshake or ritualized oath is exchanged to the common settler. Of course, none of this is seen. They hear the echo of hymnals as the trader's retinue descends. They taste the incense flooding the air. They feel the press of crowds eager to glimpse nobility incarnate. Children are lifted to see better. Elders weep at the sight of banners unfurling against alien skies. The rogue trader steps forth clad in finery that gleams like armor, their robes studded with the sigils of the Imperium. Their words rehearsed until each syllable carries the weight of revelation. They speak of markets yet untouched, manufactoria to be raised, routes to Terra itself, opened to their humble colony. For the first time in generations, a people may believe they are seen, not as a footnote on some distant administratum scroll, but as a world worthy of notice. What they do not know is that this attention comes with hunger. Rogue traders are dynasties, not individuals, each heir taught from the cradle to sharpen instinct into appetite. Their coffers are deeper than most planetary treasuries, their archives swollen with charts of warp lanes and the half-forgotten secrets of Mechanicus pacts. They do not come seeking charity, they come seeking yield. Even in their most honeyed words, there lingers the tang of ownership, the unspoken truth that what is promised today is bound in obligations that cannot be escaped tomorrow. A gift of technology is never free. A shipment of grain is never without terms. Every contract is a tether, invisible but unbreakable, drawing the world deeper into the dynasty's orbit. Some see through the veil early. A clerk tasked with negotiating tithe percentages might notice clauses that double obligations within a decade. A scholar of ecclesiarchy writs might recognize the way sermons are twisted to align profit with piety. Yet even those who glimpse the trap often convince themselves it is worth the cost. After all, are not all bargains with the Imperium weighted? Does not every colony give more than it receives, surrendering grain, ore, and bodies to fuel wars they will never witness? If exploitation is inevitable, then why not choose the patron who smiles as he binds you? The first manufactoria rise quickly, towers of iron that choke the air with new smoke, engines howling with imported power. Workers flood to them, lured by wages that seem generous at first, dazzled by the machinery that speaks of an age when mankind strode across the stars as gods. The rogue trader watches from balconies carved into void ship hull plates, goblet in hand, retinue at their back, as the world begins to reshape itself. Fields are cut for mines, rivers redirected for smelters, forests flattened for Each act is heralded as progress, recorded by scribes, and celebrated in sermons as proof that the Emperor's light has finally touched this soil. The veil of promise glimmers brighter than ever, even as its threads tighten around the throats of those who cannot yet feel the noose. Behind closed doors, though the language changes, what is spoken to planetary councils as partnership becomes conquest in the trader's private logs. The yield of ore veins is charted, not in years, but in centuries. The fertility of populations is assessed with the same cold logic as their mineral resources. Rumors begin to circulate of settlements quietly relocated to make way for expansion, of indenture contracts signed with marks rather than signatures, of accidents in the manufactoria that leave hundreds entombed beneath slag with no compensation offered to their families. Yet the celebrations continue, the veiled promise still intoxicating enough to make denial easier than defiance. And so the first stage is always the same. A world dazzled into surrendering itself willingly. No chains, no lasguns, no threats from orbit. Only the velvet hand of opportunity, drawing entire civilizations into dynasties that measure time not by lives, but by generations of profit. The rogue trader smiles, the banners fly, and the people kneel before what they believe is fortune. But the hunger behind the veil is patient. It waits for the moment when AEW turns into dependency, when contracts outweigh oaths, and when a planet realizes too late that salvation was never truly offered. It was sold. The truth reveals itself not. The manufactoria never sleep. Their chimneys belch soot that stains the horizon. Their furnaces roar with the sound of ceaseless hunger. Citizens are pressed into shifts that stretch beyond endurance, their bodies sustained only by ration blocks and recycled water. Labor servitors shuffle through the lines, their vox grills hissing commands, their lifeless faces a cruel reminder of what awaits those who collapse too often. Every corridor of the factory floor tastes of metal and grease. Every breath carries the sting of promethium fumes that sink deep into lungs until coughing becomes as natural as prayer. Children born within these walls know the rhythm of machinery before they ever hear the song of birds. This is progress, the dynasty assures them. This is civilization. The loans that financed these titanic engines of industry to begin to come due. At first, the repayments are measured in, or shipments, in cargo hauls of processed material bound for the dynasty's waiting fleets. But, or runs thin, rivers of minerals drying faster than they can be replenished, and so the interest compounds. Entire districts are conscripted to meet quotas. The work week extends. Holidays vanish. Families are told their survival depends on collective sacrifice, and to falter is to betray the Emperor himself. The rogue trader scribes speak in sermons as much as ledgers, blurring the language of faith with that of debt until the two are indistinguishable. To fail in production is not only financial ruin, it is heresy. and so despair sets in. Farmers whose fields were paved over for manufactoria watch their families wither in hablocks without sun. Craftsmen who once took pride in shaping tools with their hands are relegated to tightening the same bolt on the same assembly line for 10 hours each day until their fingers lose all feeling. Markets that once bustled with barter and laughter now serve only as distribution points for ration packs stamped with the dynasty's seal. Even the air feels owned, each breath taxed by the labor it sustains. What was once a community becomes a machine, and each citizen becomes a cog that may be replaced the moment it falters. Some resist. Small bands of miners refuse to meet their quotas, choosing collapse over compliance. Pilgrims gather in hidden shrines to beg the emperor for deliverance, whispering of rebellion even as they fear the penalty for speaking aloud. But resistance is rarely met with fire or laughter. The dynasty has subtler weapons. Wages are withheld, rations reduced, hay units repossessed. The dissenters soon find themselves starving, not from defiance, but from the slow suffocation of withheld mercy. When desperation forces them back to the manufactoria, they return thinner, quieter, their hope gone. The system does not need executions when it can simply starve. Rebellion into silence. The rogue trader's retinue watches all of this unfold with detached precision. They chart the productivity curves, measure efficiency, and send their findings back to the dynasty's archives. To them, a planet is no different from a mine shaft or a plasma furnace. It exists to be harvested until nothing remains but hollow caverns and ash-choked skies. If the population falters, replacements can always be found. Colonists from other worlds, prisoners from Imperial dungeons, or even entire populations displaced from other dynastic ventures. There is always more fuel for the furnace. The system's beauty, in their eyes, lies in its self-perpetuation. A world may be broken, but the machine of exploitation never halts. And yet, the cost is not hidden forever. Citizens begin to notice the absence of stars at night, their skies veiled by smoke. They taste the bitterness in the water, once drawn fresh from rivers, now thick with runoff. Their skin carries the sting of chemicals that never fade, their hair coated in soot that clings no matter how often they wash. Infants cough before they can speak, their lungs already blackened by the Empire's hunger. The despair that fills the air is not loud, not a cry of rebellion or the roar of armies, but a silence heavier than stone. The silence of those who realize they are not building a future, they are only burning themselves to feed someone else's. The veil of promise has fully lifted now, and in its place is the price of progress. Not chains of iron, but bonds of debt. Not armies, but quotas. Not open war, but the slow, grinding weight of servitude. The dynasty thrives, its coffers swelling with each shipment, its fleets growing fat on the marrow of distant worlds. And the people, who once believed themselves uplifted, discover that what they mistook for salvation was only a trade. They were never partners. They were products. When the veins of ore are bled dry and the manufactoria falls silent from exhaustion, the rogue trader's hunger does not abate. Resources are many things in the Imperium, and not all of them lie buried beneath stone or bound in veins of promethium. There are the bodies that toil, the voices that pray, the psyches that touch the warp. Flesh and faith are currencies of their own, and dynasties have long known how to mint them into wealth as surely as ingots cast from smelter molds. It begins with pilgrimage. Frontier worlds too poor to export minerals can yet offer souls hungry for holy journeys. The rogue traders' ships open their holds, not for cargo, but for the faithful who crowd by the thousands, desperate to glimpse Terra, Ophelia 7, or some shrine world kissed by the Emperor's grace. Passages are sold in exchange for generational debts, entire families binding themselves to labor contracts to afford a single ticket. The pilgrims march aboard singing hymns, their robes ragged but their spirits radiant, unaware that the very air they breathe has already been priced. Many will never see their destination. Some will be sold mid-journey, redirected to a hive spire or a shrine world whose economy depends on endless influx of labor cloaked as piety. They will die hauling stone for cathedrals they will never pray within, their voices drowned beneath the grinding of chains. Yet to the dynasty's ledgers, they are accounted for, faith converted to profit, relics to pass beneath the gavel of these hidden auctions, bones of saints, shards of armor, fragments of parchment scrawled in high Gothical, brought forth with the sanctity of incense and song. But behind closed doors, these treasures are traded like stock. A relic liberated from one cathedral might reappear in another system, its provenance altered by a scribe's flourish, its value multiplied by the desperation of the faithful, who cannot imagine their worship without it. Priests, once guardians of such objects, are drawn into the economy themselves, some willingly, others with their tongues bound by contracts they dare not break. Faith is no longer a matter of salvation but negotiation. The Emperor's name becomes a line item, his light a commodity to be packaged, transported, and sold. The trafficking of psychers is perhaps the most sinister transaction of all. Officially, every world of the Imperium must tithe its psychers to Terra, where the black ships bear them toward judgment. But rogue traders, sailing beyond the easy gaze of administratum oversight, find profit in diversion. Under false writs of redemption or counterfeit orders, stamped with stolen seals, psychers are collected in secret. Some are sold to the Astra Militarum, where their gifts are burned out in battlefield rituals meant to sway the warp's tides. Others are passed to Mechanicus enclaves, their minds dissected in experiments no tech priest will ever confess. The darkest fates see them delivered to rival dynasties or heretical cabals, their screams swallowed by the immensity of the void. The people of frontier worlds, unaware, believe their cursed children are being taken to serve the Golden Throne, when, in truth, they are being parceled off like livestock. Their souls weighed not in the Emperor's judgment, but in profit margins. And when a world has no psychers left to give, no relics to auction, no pilgrims to ferry, it still possesses its people. Entire populations become the last coin of exchange. A settlement of 50,000 might be resettled overnight, its citizens packed into transports with the promise of new lands, only to emerge in the drill yards of Astra Militarum mustering worlds, their names erased and replaced by regimental designations. Others are handed over to dynastic allies as indentured servants, their labor exchanged for void ship parts, mining rights, or political favors. The transactions are written in blood, and though they are dressed in the language of contract and obligation, the reality is plain. These are not trades of resources, but of lives. The most haunting truth is how blurred the boundary becomes between necessity and atrocity. Priests stand at the center of these dealings, their vestments still heavy with incense as they recite litanies that bless what should never be sanctified. Some believe their work a grim necessity, that by aiding the dynasty, they ensure survival for at least a fragment of their flock. Others are seduced by the wealth and influence that come with such negotiations, willingly translating scripture into legal writs that justify whatever bargains must be made. Their voices carry in the auction halls as surely as in the chapels, their words turning faith into leverage, their prayers into currency. And so the Emperor's name is spoken not only in shrines, but in halls where dynasts gather beneath chandeliers of bone and gold. There, amidst the laughter of nobles and the scratching of quills on parchment, salvation is priced per head, per relic, per whispered vow of loyalty. The faithful of distant worlds believe themselves closer to divinity, never seeing that their devotion has been converted into another ledger entry, another tithe to coffers already overflowing. For the rogue trader, this is not blasphemy, it is opportunity. Faith is as inexhaustible as flesh, both renewable, both endlessly pliable, when desperation is strong enough. And in the Imperium, desperation is infinite. Worlds may run dry of minerals. Manufactoria may fall silent. But so long as there are human hearts that believe, and human bodies that endure, the dynasties will never starve. The warp is not silence. It is never silence. Even in the stillest moments, when voidfarers whisper prayers to the Astronomicon and hope their course remains steady, there are currents beneath the surface. To an untrained mind, they are meaningless, but to an astropath bound by chains of soul and duty, every eddy is a voice, every tremor a word spoken without language. And in these shifting tides of unreality, the passage of rogue traders leaves marks, not like the rending of war fleets or the screaming banners of heretic hosts, but subtler, slower like ink bleeding through parchment, staining deeper with every voyage. A dynasty that bleeds a world of its resources does not only scar the soil. The act itself reverberates, ambition sharpened into cruelty, leaving ripples across the image. To the navigator guiding the vessel, those ripples feel like turbulence, a sudden distortion in what should be steady currents. To the astropath, meditating upon the Emperor's light, they are whispers, threads of greed woven into prayer. Dynasties that trade in psychers leave the strongest stains, their vessels trailing screams that never truly die, echoing even after the holds have been emptied. These echoes are not proof, not evidence admissible before any inquisitorial tribunal, but they are felt, and feeling is enough. Rumors spread swiftly through the hidden channels of the Scholastica Psychona. Names are spoken softly, shadow-marked dynasties, whose trade routes are known to quiver with unseen unrest. A family crest glimpsed in the warp becomes a curse, its presence likened to rot, spreading unseen across a banquet table. No ordo has yet declared them heretical, but no one doubts that the eye of the Inquisition lingers, watchful, patient. The irony is cruel. Rogue traders swear no fealty to the dark gods, but their appetites need no demonic pact to echo like sorcery. Greed is its own prayer, and in the warp, every prayer is heard. Some astropaths describe the phenomenon in terms of taste, for that is the only language they can cling to without descending into madness. A message carried through a certain dynasty's channel lingers like rust on the tongue, acrid and foul. Others describe it as scent the cloying perfume of rot, or the iron temps of blood, rising from the immaterial as though it were flesh. One records hearing a litany of laughter, never loud, but always waiting, hidden in the static of transmissions routed through the dynasty's name. These testimonies, collected and redacted by inquisitorial scribes, are filed away as rumor, but rumor itself, in the Imperium, has the weight of stone. Entire sectors quake at nothing more than a whisper. It is said that on certain worlds, priests preach sermons against rogue traders without naming them, warning congregations of avarice, so deep it carries echoes into the realm of demons. They never accuse directly, for fear of reprisal, but their psalms are tinged with unease. What does it mean if exploitation itself can leave a mark on reality? If greed, sharpened into a dynasty's weapon, becomes indistinguishable from the taint of chaos? Some argue it is impossible, that only worship empowers the ruinous powers. Others insist that intent is irrelevant, that pain and hunger feed the warp regardless of the banners flown. The argument is never settled. Perhaps it cannot be. Still, the shadows persist. Astropaths stationed on the edges of these dynasties' roots grow pale and haunted, their eyes ringed with sleepless hollows, their minds eroded by the constant drone of echoes they cannot silence. Some go mad, raving that the names of rogue traders have become litanies unto themselves, each syllable twisting into an invocation when spoken too often. Ships traveling behind these dynasties report mechanical malfunctions without cause, Vox systems catching fragments of voices never uttered aboard. Even the Mechanicus, bound by logic and machine rights, whisper that the warp has memory, and that it has begun to remember the sins of men. The dynasties themselves dismiss such tales. They hold banquets in their star fortresses, their goblets heavy with wine. their laughter ringing through halls hung with relics and banners of victories won. To them, these whispers are nothing but superstition, tools of fear used by lesser minds to excuse failure. If a world collapses after their departure, it is because it was weak. If psychers scream across the warp, it is because they were flawed stock, unfit for the destiny they were sold into. They see no heresy in profit, no shadow in ambition, and perhaps, from their vantage point, they are correct. But the warp does not judge, as men do. It remembers, it mirrors. And so the question lingers. Whispered in cloisters and among the sleepless psychers who strain to hear the Astronomicon through the noise. What if greed itself is enough? What if the line between exploitation and heresy does not exist, and the warp makes no distinction between deliberate blasphemy and endless appetite? If that is true, then every dynasty carving its empire on the bones of the desperate is not merely enriching itself, it is feeding something vast, patient, and hungry. And if the echoes grow strong enough, who can say whether the Imperium will answer? Ash does not vanish. It lingers in the wind, clinging to ruins and settling into the lungs of those who remain behind. When a rogue trader vessel burns its way into the void, the silence it leaves behind is never truly silent. Planets once vibrant with promise collapse into rhythms of absence of resources, of faith, of hope. The manufactoria falls still, their machines corroded and lifeless. But their outlines remain like blackened monuments, casting shadows across cities that no longer hum with activity. Entire generations stare at these husks, knowing only that they were consumed by powers they could neither see nor resist. Their labor devoured until there was nothing left to give. The survivors speak in whispers, as though the very name of the dynasty still carries weight enough to punish. They pass down stories of the day the void ship came, its silhouette blotting out the stars, and how it promised salvation before bleeding their world into dust. These names linger longer than banners, carved into stone facades of shrines, etched in ledgers salvaged from administratum ruins, spoken like curses in the dark. Some dynasties achieve immortality, not through victory but through infamy, their reputations walking longer than their fleets ever sailed. To live under their shadow is to know that departure does not mean freedom. The wound they leave is one that festers. Many worlds do not recover at all. Without minerals or fertile soil, without populations strong enough to rebuild, they collapse into feral ruin. Tribal warlords rise from the ashes, clashing amid the empty frames of smelters and the gutted shells of Habla. The old hymns are still sung, but twisted, fragmented into chants of survival rather than devotion. These are worlds forgotten by the Imperium, their data slate entries marked as expended, their tides reassigned to other, more fruitful systems. Yet the bones of manufactoria and the rusted skeletons of transport vessels remain, silent monuments to dynasties who carved wealth from their marrow and left only desolation behind. Other planets survive, but survival is its own cruelty. These are the worlds caught in half-light, trapped between collapse and stability. Their industries sputter, just enough to warrant occasional visits. Their populations maintained like herds, fed with meager imports to keep them alive for the next tithe. These worlds exist not to thrive, but to remain profitable, their cultures warped by endless dependency. Children are born into labor contracts older than their bloodlines. Priests recite sermons that blur hope and debt into the same liturgy, and governors enforce quotas with the weariness of those who know resistance is impossible. These worlds do not collapse, because collapse would end their usefulness. They are maintained in misery, and misery itself becomes the dynasty's most reliable harvest. It is said by some scribes that this pattern is not random, but deliberate. Dynasties grow not merely from wealth, but from ruin, for ruin guarantees loyalty. A prosperous world may one day rise to independence, its leaders bold enough to resist, its armies strong enough to question. But a world broken and bled, a a world whose people remember hunger as inheritance, is a world that will cling to its masters, even when those masters have long since departed. The rogue trader's shadow becomes a prison of memory, and memory itself becomes the dynasty's chain. There are even tales whispered in inquisitorial vaults that some dynasties trade in ruin as their most precious commodity. A world stripped bare becomes an example to others, a silent sermon more persuasive than any contract. When emissaries arrive at the next planet, they speak not only of opportunity, but of what happens to those who refuse. The husk of a system becomes a warning that ripples outward, ensuring compliance without a shot fired. Whether this is truth or only rumor scarcely matters. In the Imperium, rumor shapes obedience as surely as reality. The galaxy, of course, continues to turn. Other dynasties rise, other worlds fall. To the Adeptus Administratum, such patterns are mere calculations. Another line in endless ledgers, another tithe reassigned. But for those who endure in the ruins, the pattern is not abstraction but inheritance. They taste it in the dust that coats every breath, hear it in the silence of cathedrals whose bells have not rung in decades. See it in the hollowness of children's eyes who have never known a day unmeasured by quotas. These are the empires the rogue traders leave behind, empires of ash, empires of silence. And yet, paradoxically, these are the empires in which dynasties thrive, not through open conquest, not through banners unfurled across 100 systems, but through the quiet assurance that ruin is eternal and profitable. For every husk abandoned, another dynasty grows rich on the wreckage. For every silence endured, another contract is signed in blood. In this way, rogue traders are not merely explorers or conquerors, but harvesters of endings, feeding dynasties that measure time not by victories won, but by ruins left behind. In the end, this is their true legacy, not the glittering halls of their void ships, nor the grandeur of their titles, nor even the endless contracts inked upon vellum blessed by high lords. Their legacy is the silence of planets, stripped of everything but memory, the ash of manufactoria that will never roar again, the whisper of names spoken like curses in the dark. The galaxy is vast, and the Imperium eternal, but the shadows of rogue traders stretch further than either. They are dynasties built not upon life, but upon ruin, and in that ruin, they have found their most enduring profit.